Clarence Parker had just graduated from the academy and was beginning his career as a junior officer. Eager to prove himself, he approached his first day on the job with a mix of nervous energy and enthusiasm. The precinct buzzed with activity as officers prepared for their day, but Clarence's focus was on making a good impression. "Rookie, you're with Officer Jenkins today," the sergeant barked, handing Clarence his assignment. Clarence nodded sharply, his chest puffing with determination. By mid-morning, Clarence found himself patrolling a bustling downtown street. A call came in over the radio about a suspicious vehicle parked outside a high-end jewelry store. Eager to show initiative, Clarence asked Jenkins if they could check it out. When they arrived, Clarence noticed a man exiting the vehicle, his demeanor calm but commanding. Unaware of the man's identity, Clarence interpreted his confidence as suspicious behavior. "Excuse me, sir," Clarence began, his voice steady but firm. "Can I see some identification?" The man raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. "Do you know who I am?" he asked, his tone more amused than annoyed. Clarence stood his ground, a textbook response drilled into him during training. "I'm asking you to comply, sir," he said, his hand instinctively resting on his belt. The situation escalated quickly as Clarence, convinced he was dealing with a potential suspect, decided to detain the man. It wasn't until they reached the precinct that Clarence realized his colossal mistake. The man he had just handcuffed was Waren Mitchell, the precinct's captain. The precinct erupted in laughter and disbelief as Waren entered the station, his hands cuffed behind his back, followed closely by a mortified Clarence. The sergeant's eyes widened, and Jenkins groaned, rubbing his temples. "Rookie," the sergeant bellowed, "do you have any idea what you've done?" Clarence stammered, his face flushing crimson. He was acting suspiciously, sir. I didn't know." Waren, surprisingly composed, interrupted. "He was doing his job," he said, looking directly at Clarence, "even if he was overzealous." The captain removed the cuffs himself with practiced ease, handing them back to Clarence. "But rookie," Waren added, his tone carrying a sharp edge of authority, "in this line of work, assumptions can be dangerous. You need to learn when to act and when to observe." Clarence nodded, his embarrassment palpable. He spent the rest of the day fielding good-natured ribbing from his colleagues, but Waren's words stuck with him. That evening, Waren called Clarence into his office. Expecting a reprimand, Clarence entered nervously, standing stiffly at attention. "Relax," Waren said, gesturing for Clarence to sit. "You made a mistake, but mistakes are opportunities to learn. What matters is how you grow from it." Clarence was taken aback by the captain's fairness. Waren could have been harsh, but instead, he used the incident as a teaching moment. "Tomorrow, you're with me," Waren continued. "If you're going to learn how to be a good officer, you might as well learn from the best." Clarence arrived early the next morning, eager to make amends and absorb as much as he could from Waren. The captain's reputation for fairness and effectiveness preceded him, and Clarence was determined not to squander this chance. Their first call of the day was a domestic disturbance in a suburban neighborhood. As they approached the scene, Waren explained the importance of reading situations carefully. "Not everything is what it seems, Parker," he said, using Clarence's last name with a tone that was both instructive and encouraging. "Keep your eyes open and your assumptions in check." Inside the house, a couple was arguing loudly while their young child clung to a teddy bear in the corner, visibly distressed. Waren immediately took charge, his calm demeanor diffusing the tension. He asked Clarence to kneel down and talk to the child while he dealt with the parents. Clarence hesitated, unsure of what to say, but he remembered Waren's advice about staying observant. "Hey there," he said softly, kneeling at the child's level. "That's a nice teddy bear. Does he have a name?" The child nodded, hugging the bear tighter. "Mr. Fluffy," she whispered. "Mr. Fluffy looks like a great listener," Clarence said, smiling. "Do you think he can help me understand what's going on?" The child hesitated but eventually nodded, pointing toward her parents. "They're fighting about money," she said. Clarence relayed the information to Waren, who skillfully used it to mediate between the couple. By the time they left, the tension in the household had lessened, and the family had agreed to seek counseling. Back in the patrol car, Waren turned to Clarence. "Good work in there," he said. "You kept calm and connected with the child. That's the kind of empathy we need on the force." For the first time since his disastrous first day, Clarence felt a glimmer of pride. He realized that being an officer wasn't just about enforcing the law, it was about understanding people and handling situations with care. The next day, Clarence felt more confident, but knew he still had much to prove. Waren assigned him to assist with a community outreach program that morning. This event, held in a local park, was aimed at improving relationships between the police and the community. It was a stark contrast to Clarence's expectations of high-octane chases or cracking major cases, but Waren insisted on its importance. "Being an officer isn't just about chasing bad guys," Waren explained. "It's about building trust. If people don't trust us, they won't call us when it matters." As they set up booths for free safety advice, Clarence noticed a young boy watching from the sidelines. The boy, around 10 years old, seemed fascinated by the officers, but too shy to approach. Clarence walked over and crouched to meet the boy's eye level. "Hey there," he said gently. "Do you want to sit in the patrol car? You can even turn the lights on if you want." The boy's eyes lit up, but he hesitated, glancing at his mother, who nodded her approval. Soon, the boy was grinning ear to ear, sitting behind the wheel of the car as the siren briefly wailed. By the end of the day, Clarence felt a shift in his perspective. It wasn't about the adrenaline or the authority. It was about connecting with the people he served. Waren, observing Clarence's growth, gave him a rare smile. "You're starting to get it," Waren said. "Keep it up." That afternoon, Waren and Clarence were called to assist in a robbery at a small convenience store. Clarence's heart raced as they sped toward the scene. This was his first real test in a high-stakes situation. When they arrived, the store owner was visibly shaken, recounting how a masked man had fled with the cash register's contents. Waren's calm demeanor immediately reassured the victim, while Clarence took notes and scanned the scene for clues. Waren pointed to the security cameras. "Always look for extra eyes," he said, guiding Clarence to retrieve the footage. As they reviewed the tape, Clarence noticed something peculiar: the robber's limp. Waren nodded approvingly. "Good catch. Let's check nearby hospitals and clinics. Injuries like that don't go unnoticed." After hours of canvassing, they got a lead at a local urgent care center. A man matching the description had come in earlier, claiming he'd twisted his ankle. When they arrived at the man's apartment, Waren let Clarence take the lead. "Remember," Waren said quietly, "stay calm but assertive." Clarence knocked on the door and announced their presence. When the man tried to bolt, Clarence's training kicked in, and he managed to apprehend him without incident. Back at the precinct, Waren clapped Clarence on the shoulder. "You handled that well," he said. "You're starting to show real promise." Later that week, Clarence and Waren were called to a derelict building where neighbors reported suspicious activity. The building, long abandoned, had become a hub for illegal dealings. Waren warned Clarence to stay alert as they approached. The air inside was heavy with dampness, and the faint sound of muffled voices echoed through the corridors. Waren motioned for Clarence to follow quietly. In one of the rooms, they found a group of men exchanging cash and suspicious-looking packages. Waren whispered instructions to Clarence. "We'll wait for backup, but be ready if things go south." As they waited, one of the men noticed their presence. "Cops!" he yelled, and chaos erupted. Waren immediately took charge, his experience evident as he subdued one of the men. Clarence, despite his nerves, managed to detain another. By the time backup arrived, the situation was under control. "You did good, rookie," Waren said as they drove back to the precinct. "You kept your head when it mattered." Clarence realized that this job was about more than just enforcing the law. It was about quick thinking, teamwork, and unwavering resolve. He was beginning to understand what it meant to be an officer under Waren's leadership. The following day brought another challenge that would test Clarence's growing confidence. A call came through about a possible hostage situation at a local bank. Waren and Clarence were dispatched as part of the first response team. When they arrived, the scene was tense. The bank's glass doors revealed frightened customers and staff crouching on the floor, while two masked men brandished weapons and shouted demands. Waren immediately took command of the situation, coordinating with the SWAT team and negotiating with the suspects. "Stay calm and watch everything," Waren instructed Clarence. "This isn't just about force. It's about patience and strategy." While the negotiations dragged on, Clarence's sharp eyes noticed something unusual. Through a side window, he saw one of the robbers anxiously glancing toward a van parked nearby. He relayed this to Waren, who quickly deduced that the van might be an escape vehicle or contain additional suspects. Acting on Clarence's observation, a SWAT team was deployed to secure the van. Inside, they found a third accomplice and a cache of weapons, effectively cutting off the robbers' backup plan. With no way out, the remaining suspects surrendered shortly after. Back at the precinct, Waren praised Clarence for his attention to detail. "You're starting to think like a seasoned officer," he said, his words carrying genuine pride. Despite his successes, Clarence found himself facing self-doubt. The constant pressure of the job, coupled with the weight of responsibility, began to wear on him. Waren noticed Clarence's uncharacteristic quietness during their patrol and decided to address it. "Talk to me, Parker," Waren said as they parked their cruiser by a quiet waterfront. "What's on your mind?" Clarence hesitated but finally admitted, "I'm not sure if I'm cut out for this. Every decision feels like it could go horribly wrong." Waren nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Every officer feels that way at some point. The important thing is to learn from every experience and trust your instincts. You've already proven you have what it takes." To drive his point home, Waren shared a personal story about a mistake he made early in his career, one that nearly cost him his job. "But I didn't let it define me," he said, "and neither should you." Clarence felt a renewed sense of purpose. Waren's honesty and support reminded him why he joined the force in the first place: to make a difference. Not long after, Clarence and Waren were called to investigate a suspicious fire at a small family-owned restaurant. When they arrived, the scene was chaotic. Flames had consumed most of the building, and the owner, an elderly man named Mr. Rivera, was distraught. "This wasn't an accident," Mr. Rivera insisted. "I've been getting threats for weeks from a developer who wants to buy my land." Waren and Clarence began their investigation, sifting through the charred remains for evidence. Clarence found a partially burned gasoline can near the back exit, suggesting arson. As they dug deeper, they uncovered a trail leading back to a powerful local businessman with ties to the developer. Clarence was eager to make an arrest, but Waren cautioned him. "We need solid evidence," Waren said. "If we move too soon, this guy will slip through the cracks." Over the next few days, Clarence and Waren worked tirelessly to build their case, interviewing witnesses and collecting surveillance footage. Finally, they had enough to secure a warrant. The arrest made headlines, and Mr. Rivera was grateful for their persistence. "You saved my livelihood," he told Clarence, shaking his hand firmly. For Clarence, the case was a reminder of the impact an officer could have on ordinary lives. Waren's methodical approach and unshakable integrity continued to be a guiding light for the young officer. A quiet evening shift turned out to be anything but ordinary for Clarence and Waren. They were called to a domestic disturbance in a modest suburban neighborhood. When they arrived, they were greeted by a young woman, Sophia, whose bruises and trembling hands told a story of long-term abuse. "My husband," she whispered, her voice trembling. "He's out of control. He left when I called the police, but he'll come back." Waren immediately assured her of their support. "You did the right thing by calling us," he said firmly. "We'll ensure you're safe." As Clarence documented the scene, he noticed a broken photo frame on the floor. It contained a picture of Sophia with a man who looked vaguely familiar. Curious, he asked Sophia about him, and she confirmed that the man was her husband, Richard, a name that struck a chord with Waren. Back at the precinct, Waren pulled up Richard's file. It turned out that Richard had a history of run-ins with the law, including assault charges, but had always managed to evade significant consequences due to his connections. Determined to break the cycle, Waren and Clarence worked with Sophia to build a solid case. They connected her with a support network and ensured she had a restraining order. When Richard inevitably returned to intimidate her, the officers were ready, catching him in the act. As they escorted Richard away, Clarence felt a surge of pride. They had not only enforced the law, but also helped someone escape a dangerous situation. The precinct received a tip about a drug deal going down in an abandoned warehouse. Waren assigned Clarence to join the operation, his first major stakeout. As night fell, Clarence and Waren took their positions in an unmarked car parked discreetly near the warehouse. From their vantage point, they could see suspicious figures moving in and out of the building. "Watch and learn," Waren whispered, his eyes fixed on the activity. Hours passed, and Clarence's patience wore thin. "Why don't we move in now?" he asked, his eagerness evident. Waren shook his head. "We wait until we have enough evidence to make arrests that will stick." Finally, the moment came. A truck pulled up, and the suspects began unloading large crates. Waren signaled the team to move in. The bust was swift and efficient, with minimal resistance from the suspects. Back at the precinct, Clarence was exhilarated. "That was incredible," he said. Waren smiled. "Welcome to real police work. It's not always glamorous, but when done right, it gets results." The next morning, Waren called Clarence into his office. "I have a solo assignment for you," he said. Clarence's eyes widened. "Me? Alone?" Waren nodded. "It's a minor case, a series of petty thefts in a local grocery store. But it's a good chance for you to take the lead and show what you've learned." Clarence accepted the assignment eagerly. Over the next few days, he reviewed security footage and interviewed employees. He noticed a pattern. The thefts always occurred on the same day of the week and at the same time. Clarence decided to stake out the store on the next expected date. Sure enough, he spotted a teenager slipping items into his backpack. Clarence approached calmly, introducing himself as an officer and explaining the situation. The boy, terrified, confessed, "I just wanted to help my mom," he said tearfully. "We don't have enough money for food." Clarence's heart ached at the boy's words. He brought him to the precinct but recommended community service and counseling instead of harsher penalties. He also reached out to local charities to assist the boy's family. When Waren heard about Clarence's approach, he nodded approvingly. "You didn't just enforce the law, you looked at the bigger picture. That's what makes a great officer." Clarence felt a sense of fulfillment he had never experienced before. For the first time, he truly understood the balance between justice and compassion. As Clarence grew more confident in his role, his responsibilities increased. One day, he and Waren were assigned to investigate a string of burglaries in an upscale neighborhood. The break-ins were well executed, with no obvious signs of forced entry, leading Waren to suspect an inside job. The duo began their investigation by interviewing the victims and cross-referencing the time frames of the incidents. Clarence's sharp eye caught an unusual pattern. All the victims had recently hired a cleaning service owned by the same individual, a man named Peter Halston. Clarence and Waren paid a visit to Peter's office, posing as potential clients. As they spoke with Peter, Waren subtly probed for details, while Clarence observed the man's nervous demeanor and avoided eye contact. After obtaining a warrant to investigate further, they uncovered evidence linking Peter's employees to the burglaries, including stolen items hidden in a warehouse rented under Peter's name. Peter was arrested, but during his interrogation, he tried to bribe Clarence into letting him go. "You seem smart," Peter said. "Think about it. A little cooperation, and you'll be set for life." Clarence's jaw tightened as he firmly rejected the offer. "The badge I wear stands for justice, not corruption," he said, his voice steady. Waren later commended Clarence for his integrity. "It's moments like this that define your career," he said. "You chose the harder path, and that makes all the difference." One evening, Clarence overheard two senior officers talking about Waren. Their conversation was filled with accusations of Waren having ties to a known crime family. Shocked and unable to believe the allegations, Clarence decided to confront Waren directly. "Is it true?" Clarence asked, his voice tinged with doubt. "Are people saying you're connected to the Carver family?" Waren's face darkened. "I've heard the rumors," he admitted, "and I won't deny that I know them. My brother was part of that world before he died, but I've spent my life fighting against it." Clarence struggled to process the revelation. Waren's unwavering integrity had been a cornerstone of his mentorship, and this new information shook him. Over the next few days, Clarence quietly observed Waren's actions, looking for any sign of duplicity. But Waren continued to act with the same steadfast commitment to justice, ultimately convincing Clarence that the accusations were baseless and fueled by envy. "I trust you," Clarence told Waren. "I just needed to see it for myself." Waren placed a hand on Clarence's shoulder. "Trust is earned, and I'm glad you asked instead of assuming. Always remember that." A major storm hit the city, causing widespread flooding and chaos. Emergency calls flooded the precinct, and every officer was called to action. Clarence and Waren were assigned to assist in the evacuation of a low-lying neighborhood near the river. The scene was harrowing. Water levels rose rapidly, trapping families in their homes. Clarence and Waren worked tirelessly, helping people wade through waist-deep water to safety. As they neared the end of their route, they heard cries for help coming from a partially submerged house. Inside, they found an elderly woman and her young granddaughter stranded on the upper floor. "We can't leave them," Clarence said, determination lighting his face. The current was strong, making the rescue risky, but Waren and Clarence didn't hesitate. They worked together to carry the woman and child to safety, fighting against the water, pull every step of the way. By the time they reached dry ground, Clarence was exhausted but relieved. The gratitude in the grandmother's eyes made every effort worth it. That night, as the storm subsided, Waren looked at Clarence and said, "You've proven yourself time and time again. You're not just a good officer, you're a great one." Clarence felt a sense of pride and fulfillment, knowing that he had truly earned Waren's respect and trust. The precinct received intel about an underground syndicate planning a large-scale arms deal. Waren was assigned to lead the operation, and Clarence was chosen to accompany him, marking his first undercover mission. The operation required them to pose as buyers. Clarence was nervous but determined to prove himself. Waren prepped him extensively, coaching him on how to stay calm under pressure and recognize signals if things went south. The meeting was arranged in a dimly lit warehouse. Clarence and Waren arrived, dressed in casual but professional attire to blend in. Inside, they were greeted by the syndicate leader, a cold, calculating man named Victor Kane. "Got the money?" Victor asked, his eyes scanning them suspiciously. Waren calmly opened a briefcase filled with counterfeit bills. "We don't play games, Kane. Let's see the goods." Victor nodded to his men, who unveiled crates of weapons. Clarence kept a neutral expression, but his heart raced. He discreetly activated the signal device in his pocket, alerting the backup team to move in. As the deal progressed, one of Victor's men grew suspicious and demanded to see Clarence's ID. Waren stepped in, diverting attention. "You don't trust us? Maybe we're wasting our time here." The tension reached a breaking point just as the police backup stormed in. A firefight ensued, but Clarence and Waren managed to detain Victor and several of his men without injuries. Back at the precinct, Clarence received praise for his composure under pressure. Waren clapped him on the back. "You handled yourself like a pro out there. This is just the beginning for you." After the successful bust, Clarence's reputation in the precinct grew. He was soon paired with a new recruit, a fresh-faced officer named Emily, who reminded him of his own early days. Emily was eager but inexperienced, and Clarence took his role as her mentor seriously. Their first assignment together was a series of petty vandalism incidents in a residential area. As they patrolled the neighborhood, Emily voiced her frustration. "I thought police work would be more exciting." Clarence chuckled. "It's not always action-packed, but every case matters, no matter how small. It's about serving the community." Emily soon saw the truth in Clarence's words. They caught a group of teenagers in the act of spray painting graffiti. Instead of arresting them, Clarence spoke to them about the consequences of their actions and arranged for them to clean up. The mess is part of community service. That's how you make a difference, Clarence told Emily afterward. It's not just about punishment, it's about guiding people to do better. Emily nodded, inspired by Clarence's approach. I hope I can be as good an officer as you someday. You will, Clarence said with a smile. Just keep learning and stay true to why you joined. One day, Clarence received an unexpected visitor at the precinct. A lawyer representing a powerful businessman, Harold Langston, who was under investigation for embezzlement. The lawyer offered Clarence a bribe, sliding an envelope filled with cash across the table. If you make the evidence disappear, this can all go away. Think about your career, your future. Clarence's jaw tightened. He stood up, picked up the envelope, and threw it into the trash. Get out before I charge you with attempting to bribe an officer. The lawyer smirked. You'll regret this. Later, Clarence discovered that Harold Langston had connections within the city's political elite. Pressure began mounting from higher-ups to drop the investigation. Waren, who had faced similar challenges in his career, stood by Clarence's side. We don't bow to corruption, Waren said firmly. If we let them win, we've lost everything we stand for. Clarence and Waren doubled down on their efforts, gathering irrefutable evidence against Langston. When the case went to trial, Clarence testified with unwavering confidence, ensuring justice was served. Afterward, Clarence reflected on the experience. He knew that standing up for what was right wasn't always easy, but it was what made the badge worth wearing. Clarence and Waren's relentless pursuit of justice brought them to their most challenging case yet. A criminal mastermind known only as the Whisper, who orchestrated various illegal activities without ever leaving a trace. The Whisper's true identity had remained a mystery for years, and his operations were notorious for eluding law enforcement. The investigation began when Clarence intercepted a cryptic message during a routine patrol, hinting at a high-stakes heist involving the city's largest bank. The team worked around the clock to decipher the code, and it was Clarence's sharp instincts that cracked it. The message revealed the heist's location and time, but provided little else. Waren and Clarence devised a plan to stake out the bank, deploying undercover officers and surveillance teams. As the night of the heist approached, tensions ran high. At precisely 2 a.m., the heist began. A group of masked individuals breached the bank's vault with military precision. Clarence and Waren moved swiftly, coordinating with the team to corner the suspects. As the suspects were apprehended, Clarence noticed one of them behaving oddly, subtly trying to hide a small device. Upon closer inspection, Clarence discovered it was a communication tool linked to the Whisper. The suspect refused to talk, but Clarence's discovery was a breakthrough. Back at the precinct, Clarence and Waren analyzed the device. It led them to a hidden safe house on the outskirts of the city. When they raided the location, they found detailed plans for multiple crimes and evidence pointing to a prominent businessman, Marcus Vale, as the Whisper. The revelation of Marcus Vale's involvement sent shockwaves through the precinct. Vale was a respected figure in the community, making it difficult to convince others of his guilt. Clarence and Waren knew they needed concrete proof to bring him down. They orchestrated an elaborate sting operation, planting a fake deal that they knew Vale couldn't resist. Waren played the role of a corrupt middleman, while Clarence monitored the operation from a nearby surveillance van. When Vale arrived at the meeting, his arrogance was on full display. He believed himself untouchable, boasting about his influence and power. Clarence and Waren had anticipated this and recorded every word as evidence. As the deal concluded, officers swarmed the location, arresting Vale and his accomplices. Vale's smug demeanor faded as he realized the extent of the trap. Back at the precinct, Clarence felt a sense of triumph, but also exhaustion. "We did it," he said to Waren. Waren nodded. "This is the kind of case that defines a career. You've proven yourself time and again, Clarence. I couldn't be prouder." The successful takedown of the Whisper earned Clarence and Waren widespread recognition. The mayor held a ceremony to honor their bravery and dedication, presenting them with medals of valor. During the ceremony, Clarence reflected on his journey. From his early days as a rookie making mistakes to standing alongside Waren as an equal, he realized how much he had grown. "I couldn't have done this without you," Clarence told Waren afterward. Waren smiled. "You've always had it in you. I just helped you see it." With his reputation solidified, Clarence was offered a promotion to detective. The decision weighed heavily on him, as it meant leaving the patrol team and working more independently. He sought advice from Waren, who encouraged him to take the opportunity. "This is your chance to make an even bigger impact," Waren said. On his last day as a patrol officer, Clarence took a final ride with Waren. They reminisced about their journey together, from their initial clash to the bond they now shared. As they parted ways, Waren said, "You're ready for this, Clarence. Go make a difference." Clarence nodded, determination in his eyes. "I will. Thank you for everything." Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed the story. Please don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe for more delightful stories.